I would love to know your thoughts, backstory of the firing of Sean McDermott that led to a press availability of owner Terry Pegula and the new GM / president of football operations of the Buffalo Bills in Brandon Beane. What led to all of that? What do you have?
Yeah, so I think what you've seen over the last week is a lot of the tension and pressure that was on everybody over the course of the last 3 or 4 months spilling out. I don't think, and you can see it by the way their interviews list has been kind of cobbled together now. I don't think that there was any major discussion between ownership and anybody else in that building about doing this. Yet, I think as November became December, as December became January, as the AFC bracket materialized, and there's no Joe Burrow in there, there's no Lamar Jackson in there, most of all, there's no Patrick Mahomes in there. There was just this tension and pressure that didn't exist before in that building. And I think, when you look at Josh Allen's emotion coming out of the game, when you look at Sean McDermott's reaction to the officiating coming out of the game, and now this with Terry Pegula, it's almost like all of that has spilled out. This has been, I think, one of the most well-run organizations in the sport over the last 9 years since Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane got there. And so, to me, it's really eye-opening watching that. It's like watching a car crash in real time, over the last few days there. And so they still have good people there, and I trust they get it right. But the optics of it aren't good. Throwing a player who's still on your roster and Keon Coleman under the bus the way that they did. And I think, I don't think it was all that graceful the way that Terry Pegula talked about Sean McDermott either. It kind of felt a little bit like you're kicking a guy when he's down, which I'm sure, if he had a second chance at that, maybe he would word some of the things a little bit differently. And then I think the optics of promoting Brandon Beane. I think Brandon Beane's one of the most capable general managers in all of football. However, you have to understand the way this is going to look, and I think of the scene from Office Space where I can't remember what the guy's name was, but the character, the main character in Office Space, and the other guys had just been let go, and they go to tell him, and then he's like, well, yeah, I got promoted. I know it's not fair. You know what I mean? Like, it just sort of felt that way. And the reality of it is, this is sort of a restructure for them. And they're going to what Pegula has in the NHL with the Sabres, and maybe what he's more comfortable with, which is you're going from having your coach and GM report to ownership to now having the coach report to the GM and the GM report to ownership. So they're restructuring a little bit here. At least that's the idea. We'll see whether or not whoever the new coach is changes that at all. But a messy week altogether and a restructuring of the organization that's part of it. And it's hard not to think that when you listen to the words, right, and you listen to them say what happened in Denver was the reason why, it sort of, I think, brings to light, just how tense and how scattershot everything's been there the last few days.
Because it does make it sound like it was an emotional decision rather than one that you normally take some time, clear heads, and things of that nature. And Pegula still seemed to be hot. He seemed to be not only hot about the way it ended in Denver, but also the way he's clearly attuned to narratives that have been ascribed to his general manager and one particular player in Keon Coleman. And unfortunately for them, one of the more shared pieces of video I saw on socials yesterday, Albert, was the Hard Knocks, in which Brandon Beane is clearly on board with Keon Coleman, if not his own idea. But let's place that aside for the moment and say, so you're saying there's a new structure in Buffalo, basically the structure that John Harbaugh just undid with the Giants. So if Breer, if Brian Daboll comes to Buffalo, he'd be familiar with that setup of reporting to the general manager. And is that part and parcel of what's going on there? Daboll would be a familiar choice. And one that I think maybe does need to be sold to the fan base in terms of his wins and losses. But what do you think, Albert?
It's kind of interesting because a couple of days ago I heard probably not. But I think Josh Allen's involvement in this is a factor. And Josh is very, very close with Brian Daboll. And so, I do think that they're going into this with an open mind, but you can clearly see like a lot of the guys that they're bringing in have connections. Joe Brady works there now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Brian Daboll, who was there this morning, and you have Anthony Lynn, who worked there previous to this regime. So like there's familiar faces that are coming in to interview there. And, so it kind of, that's why I said when they put this list together, it does feel a little bit like, all right, like we've got to kind of cobble something together and hustle something together and kind of collect what we're doing, because it just didn't feel like this is something where, okay, I'm pulling the list out of my drawer and it's been ready for 2 months and here we go, And obviously they're later, and part of that is, the fact that they were in the second round of the playoffs, which puts them behind the other 9 teams that had openings. It's only 6 now, or it's only 5 now, but the other 9 teams that had openings had a jump start on them, or head start on them. So I think Daboll's candidacy is interesting because I think this is going to be a Josh Allen-centric hire. I would also say that this is a golden opportunity for them. And I think all those guys realize that you may never have this sort of carrot to put in front of coaching candidates before, where you've got Josh Allen a few months from his 30th birthday, in the prime of his career. He's the best player in the sport. You're going into a new stadium. I mean, if you're doing this again in 4 or 5 years, you don't know that Josh Allen's going to be still in the same state he is now based on the mileage he's already got on his body, so I think you have to treat this as a golden opportunity. So they're going to go through these interviews. Would I be surprised if you take a big swing? If they were to take a big swing, I wouldn't be surprised, because that's what this sort of opportunity dictates, at least in my mind.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Check us out every single day streaming live on Disney Plus and the ESPN app 12 to 3 Eastern.